Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on tackling the changes of the curriculum and assessment review. My name is Eva McManaman. I'm the manager for Pearson Qualifications English, but I'm very pleased that it's not actually me you're here to listen to today. It's our fantastic trust leaders who have agreed to join us. So as you can see, you've got their live faces in front of you and some still faces on the slides. So we have Brian Doyle, Director of English at United Learning, Heather Holmes, Trust Strategic Lead for Secondary English at Outwood Grange Academy Trust, Leandri Dannhauser, Network Lead for English at ARC, and Rebecca Hawkins, the National Lead for English at Oasis. So as I said, it's to listen to these brilliant trust leaders that we've got you here today, and I hope that they give you ideas about what you should be thinking about the car, what you could be thinking about it, and where they will be kind of taking their trust in response to it. We're going to begin with some top takeaways. Then we'll think about future planning and the reform wish list that they might have and what they really want for the future of English. But before that, I'm going to spotlight them all with one little icebreaker. So I'm going to ask them to let us know which text they have most enjoyed teaching during their time as an English teacher. And I'm just going to start by talking about when I was an English teacher many years ago now. And my favourite moment was year 8 teaching them Shrek and introducing them to moving image and how camera angles and sound and everything was in play. And the little eyes lighting up as they kind of got to watch a film which they loved, but to see it in a different way and really engage with it. So that was my favourite text that I've taught as an English teacher. I'll go to Brian because you're just next on the line, Brian.
Hi there. My favourite text for teacher has been Measure for Measure, actually. So I think for A levels, so I think sometimes, particularly at GCSE, you're on a sort of rotation of Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet for years, and then often Othello at A levels. So I loved it because it was something that didn't have a sort of agreed version of what you should be saying about it. And there was also a fantastic production at the National many years ago, quite shocking, that we took the students to. So that really brought it to life. So yeah, Measure for Measure for me.
Thank you, Brian. Leandri?
Similar to Brian, actually, not the text, but quite a classical text choice. Before Macbeth became the choice at GCSE, we used to teach it at Key Stage 3. And there was something joyous about seeing Year 9 students really engage with the play. And a vivid memory that will stick with me for a very long time was when a Year 9 boy said to me, "Miss, Macbeth is the boss." Obviously the lingo of choice at the time, but equally having taught it to low prior attaining groups, and they loved it so much that they decided that they wanted to do a whole production of Macbeth in their own time, out of their own accord, and wanted to then perform that to the teaching body. So I think even though a classic text probably overtaught at GCSE these days, the memories I have of children really enjoying and engaging with Shakespeare is one that will stay with me for a long time.
Thank you, Leandri. Rebecca?
So mine is it might be a bit of a boring choice for some people because it's a text that a lot of people have taught for years and years and years before it disappeared off the curriculum because we couldn't teach it anymore. But of Mice and Men, when I was a PGCE student 21 years ago now, I think, my very first time teaching that text was in a classroom, which was also the canteen. So it was very, very difficult to get transition from break time and lunchtime to when I was teaching. But it was the first time in my life with that very difficult class on a rainy day when it was pure silence because we were reading up to when George, spoiler alert, kills Lenny. And it's the first time ever I had complete, absolute pin drop silence in that room because everybody was just with me. And I think that was the moment when I knew this is the profession for me.
Oh, fantastic. Heather?
Well, in a similar vein, in some ways, in that while I have chosen a classic, it's Romeo and Juliet for me. It's about the ending of it, which really struck me when I was teaching it at school, because we've got so used to it, haven't we? We know there's no emotion for us anymore necessarily in the death of Romeo and Juliet. We know it's going to happen. You know, there's a spoiler in the prologue, but I remember teaching it to some year 11s who had you know, a endless cavalcade of supply teachers, and then I was asked to take over the lesson. We got to the end of the text, and obviously they're both lying dead, and one of the boys just said, "You have got to be kidding me." After all of this, and they both died at the end. And it was just a revelation of really good literature hitting home, because they were engaged and they'd enjoyed it, and it didn't matter it was written so long ago. It was an engaging story for them. And I remember thinking that, yeah, you're absolutely right, Becca, that's what it's about, isn't it? Bringing it to life.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Okay, I'll move us on to the business of the webinar, talking about the car. And now obviously the car came out late November last year. Not sure how many people have been able to really engage with the details of it, because it's obviously a very large car report, the curriculum assessment review report, and the DFE response to it. So that's why we've gathered these people together, so they can kind of give you their top takeaways and what they're thinking here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can just focus on what you're saying, but we're going to move on to the top takeaways. And to vary it up, I'm actually going to start with Leandri, if that's okay, and then we'll kind of mix it up. Now, we're going to give us one takeaway each. But if anyone's has also read it and in the chat, and you want to kind of put what your takeaway is, please add it to the chat. And also, if you've got any questions that come to mind or any thoughts that you want to share, please add it to the chat. And then at the end, we have got time for Q&A, so that we can go back to it and have a look at what people will want to suggest and ask and discuss. Okay, Leandri, over to you.
Thanks, Eva. I think a top takeaway for me has definitely been the introduction of the Oracy framework. I think it's a significant and very welcome development. I think it recognizes what we already know about talk, that it's fundamental to learning, that it forms the basis on which reading, writing, and wider cognitive skills are built. So I think by placing Oracy on an equal footing with the already existing reading and writing frameworks, the review establishes spoken language oracy as a core competency rather than an optional add-on. And I think for secondary English, this matters enormously.
Sorry, it's just frozen for me.
And just in terms of our subject, generally, I think it matters enormously because our subject relies on talk as a mode of thinking, whether they're interpreting complex texts, constructing arguments, rehearsing ideas.
So I know it's frozen for me only, but if others could carry on. I'm sorry. Apologies, Leandri, because it froze for me. But if you finish, Rebecca, would you be able to kind of continue? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely fine. I don't know if it's on my side or what was the last thing that anyone heard, but I think it's really important to have a really clear framework that provides us the tools to teach oracy deliberately rather than assuming students will acquire the knowledge and skills incidentally.
Definitely. Thank you, Leandri. Okay, Rebecca.
I think for me, there's so many takeaways, but the key takeaway for me is the idea that, you know, the work that we've been doing for the past 6 years on creating a really ambitious and robust Key Stage 3 curriculum was really time well spent, and it really validates the importance of Key Stage 3 being, you know, we hear lots of mention. Mary Myatt's done a lot of talking recently about, and has done for many years, about Key Stage 3 being the intellectual powerhouse of the curriculum, or should be, the ambitious years. And I think we've spent 6 years really working under the vision of the amazing Josie Sachs at South Bank, who is the visionary of our curriculum, really putting the work into Key Stage 3 and making sure that it is a journey to Key Stage 4. And I think the car really does shine a light on the importance of that. And I think the second takeaway linked to that is the fact that assessment shouldn't be driving the curriculum, and actually we should really be thinking hard about intellectual equity and making sure that we're doing everything to ensure that our students get the best possible deal all the way through their experience, right the way from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and all the way through to Key Stage 4. And one of the things that has happened because of the pressure of assessment on schools over the years is that we've tended to, or some schools have tended to feel the pressure to move things that should be in Key Stage 4 into Key Stage 3, and really losing that opportunity to build diversity, to build ambition, to build real immersion in thoughtfully, carefully curated texts that are really inspiring for young people. And I think the car allows that to sort of really be celebrated and reminds us that Key Stage 3 is a real opportunity for us to do more and to do better.
Thank you.
So,
thank you. Heather.
Well, for me, I think I'm really interested in the idea of diversity and what that will look like in the new curriculum. You know, I was reading about, you know, teachers have old favourite texts, don't they, that they go to all the time, and that's partly due to resources, it's partly due to workload. But actually, there are lots and lots of authors out there that we just don't access at Key Stage 4 level. And also, I think it's really important that, you know, I've just referenced a play from the canon. Of course, it's really important that we continue to keep the canon in there. But it's also really important that children see themselves, you know, in the literature that they're reading. English as a subject, we're quite concerned, aren't we, about identity, we're concerned about voice, we're concerned about connection, all of those big ideas. And we tend to, you know, we always say English teens sort of wear their hearts on their sleeves. We like to talk about everything, don't we? We like to talk about our big feelings. But if you're a student that doesn't see themselves in a piece of writing, that's really hard to position yourself. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how they bring new writing, diversity of, and sort of within the curriculum and within the text that we study, without adding additional expectations to the number of texts that we study, because obviously that's important too. So I think, yeah, diversity will be really, really interesting to see how we can, you know, that idea of making a curriculum that's rich, that's broad, you know, meaningful. What texts can we choose using teacher autonomy or will be suggested to us that will make that difference?
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, it's definitely a thread which runs through the whole the car. Brian, now last to you. Your takeaway.
So a big takeaway for us was what is discussed around grammar and the way that it's taught at Key Stage 2. So one of the things that report emphasises that at the moment it's taught almost as sort of tick list, sort of definitions and terms, and students at Key Stage 2 are expected to know a huge amount. And actually that does pose a problem for secondary schools with Key Stage 3 curriculums, because you run the risk of, if you're threading through that grammar that's meant to have already been taught at Key Stage 2 that students apparently know into your Key Stage 3 curriculum, you feel like you are sort of dumbing that down slightly. But as we know, you know, a big issue for lots of our students when they get to year 11 is that they are still not writing accurately, they're still not understanding how sentences work. And at the moment, we have secondary school teachers who won't be used to teaching that grammar either for the first time. So up until now, we've been sort of looking back. We have the benefit of having Key Stage 3 curriculum as well, looking back at the first moments that they were taught. So I think that the idea that Key Stage 2 grammar will be spread across Key Stage 3 will be really helpful, and also the emphasis on the use of language rather than just being able to identify and define different grammatical terms. So we're both excited by that, and also it feels like that's possibly quite a big job in terms of reorganising Key Stage 3, but for the right reasons. So yeah, so that it feels like a positive thing.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, and I've got first-hand experience of my year 6 son focusing on a lot of grammar at the moment in preparation tests, and constantly trying to reinforce to him, it's lovely, but you know what that subordinate clause is, but how would you use it? when you write, and so yes, absolutely, it's the use of grammar.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
we're
I think
going.
it will, oh,
Go on.
sorry. I was just going to say, I think it will have a huge knock-on effect to students at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 if students at the end of Key Stage 2 are learning to use that knowledge to craft writing rather than just identify, and learning to be writers a lot earlier. Because actually what we find often is we get students coming from Key Stage 2, and actually they're used to writing a lot and they're used to actually producing quite a lot of work, but they're not used to conscious crafting in the way that all of their knowledge, the theoretical knowledge they've got of what parts of sentences look like is far advanced to students working at Key Stage 4. They just don't know how to apply it. So harnessing that in the right way and thinking about it being a skill we can apply is going to be really, really important. And I also think it will make writing more joyful for students as well, rather than, they're not just learning this so that they can recognize all of these things and then it doesn't matter, it doesn't mean anything. It would be joyful for them to be able to consciously do it, but then also recognize it in other people's writing as well, and it will help with reading and analysis as well when they come to do that Key Stage 3.
Definitely. Heather, you've got your hand up.
Well, that's exactly what I was about to say, that I think it will also improve their skills with reading as well as their skills with writing. I mean, our trust uses an exam board that really, really objects to device spotting. We want students to be able to talk about the impact of a chosen word rather than just simply being able to label a chosen word. And I think that's really hard for students to do if they don't know how to manipulate devices in their own writing. So if they can identify why they're doing it in their own writing, they can then identify why an author has done it in their writing. And that leads to them being able to make much more impactful sort of analytical comments on writing rather than simply, working through your similes, your metaphors, or whatever you can spot. And if you can't spot anything, you find yourself absolutely paralyzed because you don't know what to write about. So yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I think the way that what tends to happen at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 now in some schools is that sort of all devices become sort of flattened out, become equal. So because students are often taught to feature spot, so they can say identify a simile and then say this suggests that, but they lose the point where we talk about the way these devices actually work. So what is the purpose of a simile? How does that comparison work? And they sort of all devices become equal. So I think an important stage of that is actually teaching them what the possible impacts are of different methods that a writer might use, rather than it all be sort of flattened out into sort of PEE style paragraphs, essentially.
Sorry, I don't know how
to take Rebecca's comment and then move us on.
Yeah, sorry. I just thinking about sort of this idea of device spotting. I think what ultimately we want to do is we want everything we teach students, all the knowledge that we give them, is about empowering them and giving them a voice, because we don't want them to be just noticing devices. We want them to be affected by the text that they are consuming and to have a genuine reaction. So I'm less worried about whether they can name that thing and whether they can articulate that feeling and articulate that reaction. And that's what I sort of was talking about at the beginning, about this idea of intellectual equity with students. The students that need that input the most, that need to be sort of guided to read texts that they wouldn't normally be able to access without our help, because let's face it, they can access social media, they can access the texts that are out there that are not what we want them to be reading necessarily at this moment in time. But we want to give them the tools and the voice to be able to react to and immerse themselves in things that are unfamiliar to them. So starting with, how do you feel about this? And then giving them the tools to articulate that reaction is the way round we should be doing it. So again, that's why it's problematic at Key Stage 2 to give them all of this, wealth of theoretical knowledge, but then tell them but the job is that you're not spotting these things when we get to key stage 3. That's not what they're for. Is the wrong way around, and I think this really will help to flip that balance.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to move on to for us to focus on planning for the future. So we've had this car, it's kind of laid out the priorities for the car, and then DfE responded to it. But what we would all like to know is, as trusts, how are you responding to it? What's your reactions, and are there any implications for what you're planning for your future? I will start with Heather, if that's okay.
Well, I don't know if this is controversial, but at the moment we're sort of in a bit of a wait and see process. I mean, we have strategies and systems that we know to be effective, particularly with students in our demographic. And I work in a trust with 28 secondary schools, which means if we introduce anything new at any point, it has to be absolutely the right thing. We need to produce a CPD that accompanies it, the materials, the resources. Our staff need to feel well supported and confident moving forward, which means it's very difficult to take decisive action when you're uncertain what the future holds. I think my CEO is one of his key ideas is he'll say, look, we need to make the thing. And at the moment, curriculum review is not the thing for us. We've got a cohort of students that are going through this year that we want to be very successful in their outcomes and make it to college. And we don't want to be distracted from that in some ways until we have something a little bit firmer, a little bit more concrete. I mean, having said that, and I think probably other people will have views on this, the introduction of the Oracy framework is probably something where we have begun to make sort of tentative inroads in a way that isn't established yet, and we could put some thought into that. But at the moment, I think we're in a little bit of a holding pattern while we just see where we end up. And what has been really interesting is that we've been able to engage with various exam boards who are asking for input, and that has allowed us to, give some feedback as to why we choose the board we do and what we look for, and how we like questions that are accessible for our students, so they don't need to decode the question before they even get to writing, an answer that they're judged on. So I suppose there are conversations happening, and we are alert to what is going on around us, but we are at the moment just keeping the thing.
Thank you, Heather. I'll move on to Brian, if that's okay.
Hi. So some of the changes that we were making in our Key Stage 3 curriculum reflect some of the changes that are happening, even if we don't have the details yet. So I guess Oracy is the one that we've done the most work on, and we'll continue as we were. So we have our own Oracy framework across our trust that we've had for a few years now. And because of the lack of sort of specificity in the current programs of study for Key Stage 3, we have created that ourselves and thought about what that would look like and how that would progress across the 3 years. Because what we were discovering before is that unless it's sort of formalized and we decide that these are the opportunities that students will have and this is what it will look like, I think often when teachers were sort of chopping stuff out of schemes of work or lessons, they would often lose the Oracy part of it, because actually because, as we know, sort of reduced the perceived reduced importance of it at Key Stage 4 at the moment means that it's something that teachers don't, and I understand how this happens, necessarily feel is responsible for. So it seems to be the one that goes. So we're continuing with that as we were, and plotting out those opportunities and thinking about what success looks like. We are also, again, something we'd already started, so we'll continue and then look at how we have to adjust it, is we had been going back to Key Stage 2 and looking at the grammar that's taught there and how that's taught there, and then how that might build up over Key Stage 3. So we'd already started to ignore the idea that grammar is something that's taught in Key Stage 2, and then we presume that they know it in Key Stage 3. So we're still continuing that. I had a meeting today, actually. We're planning a new specification for Year 9. We'll continue with that because it feels like the right thing to do now anyway, and then hopefully we can adjust that when we get some more information about the changes. But I agree, Heather, it's it's a nervous time to be making whole scale changes when actually they could change in a couple of years. But certainly with Oracy, it feels like the right thing to do anyway. So that's something we've been working on a lot.
Thank you. Leandri, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I think Brian and Heather has kind of already said everything else that we're also thinking about at the moment. I think for us, it's really important that we continue improving reading, writing, and spoken language offer in our curriculum. We're very lucky that our curriculum aligns very, very well with a lot of the things that the Carl already pointed out. So we're just working at this stage to refine some of the things that we are already doing. We already have lots of writing opportunities in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, for example. And so what Brian was saying there around kind of like grammar teaching specifically, we have and have had for quite a few years a grammar strand to our Key Stage 3 curriculum. And I think what we're now trying to do is bring that writing mastery units and especially the extended writing tasks a little bit more in line with writing opportunities that they will have in their literary heritage studies. So trying to make that connection a bit more precise for our students to make sure that that transfer from the utilitarian aspect of grammar then transfers into the analytical, the creative, etc. The biggest difference probably has been the additions that we've made around spoken language in the curriculum. And so this is something that we have already taken deliberate steps to strengthen the role of spoken language across our English curriculum. We're looking very much around structured oral communication opportunities. We've embedded that in every unit, ranging from things like exploratory talk, dialogic talk, and to more formal modes such as debates, presentations, and recreative activities. Some of those things which had never existed in the curriculum before, as have been mentioned, they were often deprioritized in favor of reading and writing. Often schools, especially school leaders, would think that if classrooms were silent places where lots of writing was happening, learning must be happening. And I think we know that those are actually poor proxies for learning. So we're trying to bring that joy and rigor back through embedding more spoken language opportunities in our Key Stage 3 curriculum specifically. And just having really high expectations for vocabulary and articulation through those practices like say it again, say it better, for example, and making sure that those habits for discussion are really being worked on in English as the kind of leaders of this across the school, but obviously also more broadly. A lot of our schools are working on what oracy means in their contexts. And again, we're all always kind of thinking about text choices, constantly reviewing text choices, trying to think about what will really enable our students to see themselves in literature, to enjoy the literature without destabilizing the canon, but also giving them plenty of opportunity to engage with contemporary texts. So what a lot of our schools have been doing is bringing in satellite texts that kind of sits around those classic texts as a form of comparison to highlight and illuminate the themes that they might already be experiencing in classic texts, and then being able to bring that over into contemporary and vice versa. We've also thought about those classic texts and how the lenses through which we're teaching them. So, for example, even though Shakespeare's Tempest is a really classical text, we also look at it through the lens of colonialism and othering, and to make sure that students don't just see the classic for the classic, but also seeing it through the various different lenses in which they can engage with those texts in particular. And that seems to have gone really well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, that sounds great. Rebecca, sorry, kind of your. I hope everyone hasn't taken your plans for the future. Kind of what was.
Leandri's done all of our plans for the future, and I totally agree with what you said, Heather, at the beginning about us being in this bit of a holding pattern. And I think the key takeaway for me in terms of what we're doing now and thinking about what we've already got, very much linked to what Leandri has just said, is that essentially, if our curriculum is strong and robust and does the job that we hope that it does, then any changes to assessment shouldn't be a cause for panic. if we are doing our job correctly, then we are equipping our young people with the skills to be able to cope with something unseen, something new, because we have taught them to be discerning about what they read. We've taught them to interrogate what they read with confidence. We've taught them how then to externalize their thinking verbally and in writing. So I think the key thing for our curriculum at Oasis is that just to hold true to Josie's original vision when she first created the curriculum, which was all about that intellectual equity through some really thoughtful texts that encourage durable knowledge. We think really deeply and carefully about the texts that we teach. That's all underpinned by some really carefully selected versatile vocabulary, which underpins everything that we teach. We teach through the idea of theme. So we look at in year 7 the idea of heroes in all of their different versions, the idea of the traditional archetypal sort of view of a hero, the flawed hero, what we might how heroes may transgress our expectations, and all of these sorts of things through the lens of some really powerful texts. We also have a really diverse curriculum, so we have throughout the curriculum lots of opportunities to look at texts from different authors and different backgrounds. We've got year 8 study Binti and Things Fall Apart. Year 9 we study the Harlem Renaissance. So there's lots of opportunities for students to see writing through different lenses, to be able to articulate their thinking with some really powerful vocabulary, which allows them to have the voice that we want them to be able to feel confident in sharing those ideas. So I think the main thing for anyone kind of thinking about the car and thinking about implications for themselves and their schools and their trusts is don't panic and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't know what's going to happen, but be confident in the careful decisions that you've already made. And if you've, like us, spent 6, nearly 7 years working on a really robust curriculum that you're proud of, most of it probably is going to be absolutely fine. I think where we are now, as far as I see it, in this kind of interesting liminal space between the traditional roots that we want to absolutely protect fiercely, you know, the literary canon and the classics, and then sort of this sort of emerging shoots of a world of modernity that is both exciting, maybe a little bit frightening, but also holds so many opportunities for new ways of doing things, and sort of harnessing the best of the world that the students inhabit and bringing it into our curriculum whilst remaining connected to those roots that literature has, that teaches us how to be a human being and how to exist in a world that's constantly changing, how to be questioning individuals, curious individuals. All of those things we can do regardless of the changes that are coming. So I think it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Thank you. I was going to throw out a challenge because no one else had mentioned this, but I feel like you're starting to touch on it, because one of the things in the car you've all mentioned about obviously in the Odyssey framework, and that's obviously quite a large aspect of it. But in respect to the GCSE English language, there's also been the mention of the multimodal and the ephemeral text, which obviously has not been part of the current GCSE, which has been for the last 10 years. So we're just going to throw back the challenge. What are you going to do about that? So have you got any plans in relation to that aspect, which it looks like it is likely that GCSE may have these aspects, this content, don't know to what extent. So anyone can answer.
I think it's interesting because I think where what already exists for language is the one place where it's no longer going to be fit for purpose. It's the one sort of element of the car that really suggests that there are large changes on the horizon that are going to really impact what we're doing. I think what my thinking is that there's a real opportunity that we're unique in being able to harness, is that there is this real debate at the moment about attention spans and students not being able to engage with literature and not being able to, to really be discerning because they're constantly clicking and they're living in this sort of ephemeral world. And I think one thing that's really exciting and possibly a great opportunity is that maybe we can flip the script on that one, because if we use these ephemeral texts and we're using these multimodal texts that are mentioned, what we could actually do is turn something that is, habitual scrolling into a way to get students' attention by getting them to look at the same news article that has been published in 3 different places and actually get them to be discerning about, are they the same? Are they different? What do you notice about the facts, so to speak, in this compared to this? Can we trust it? Can we not trust it? So actually we can turn something that could potentially be a danger for our young people in terms of, scrolling through, not giving our attention, not paying attention, into a real opportunity to actually make them pay attention. So I feel like if we utilize sort of these sorts of examples, we could actually alleviate some of the dangers that we're all worried about by teaching them how to engage with these texts and giving the opportunity to do it in a more focused way. So I feel that that's really exciting.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment in at all on that, or I can move the conversation on?
Yeah, I think it's
just one thing that. Oh, sorry, Leandri, after you.
Sorry, Heather. Thank you. I think just generally speaking, it's great that there's the opportunity for us to broaden the scope and exposure of the types of texts that our students encounter. And I think just because a text isn't traditional part of the canon doesn't necessarily reduce its literary merit that it might have. And I think specifically ephemeral texts provide that historical insight and can be seen as cultural artifacts. And I like what Rebecca was suggesting around how one article or news fact has been presented in different ways depending on the mode of that form of communication. And equally, ephemeral texts have always been around. We just have never really given it that kind of academic focus at secondary education. So even being able to have a look at ephemeral texts over time and its cultural significance to the English language, I think is a welcome addition in general.
Thank you, Leandri. And Heather.
Well, I was just thinking that obviously some of the criticisms that have come back between English language and English literature is that there's an overlap, isn't there? A significant overlap between the type of text, between the 2 specifications, and that's why they want to make language very, very different. So I'll be interested to see what they do, but I feel like there should be a caveat attached to that there still needs to be good quality extended writing available for students to read and answer questions on. Part of the test of English language now, even though it may involve 19th century text, which you might not like, is that it brings together skills of evaluation, skills of synthesis, so many of the things that we're talking about, bringing texts together, but it does it in a way that allows students to really engage with sometimes quite challenging language. And it has to be of a sufficient challenge because we're not a tiered paper. And I think that's really important. And that's the challenge for the crafters of the new specifications, that the ephemeral texts that they put in front of us, the multimodal texts that go in front of students, have to be sufficiently rigorous that students leave school with a really with an excellent grasp of English language. And while they may not, who knows, be asked to write a formal letter in their exam moving forward, will still be able to craft a formal letter and apply for a job. Because that is the purpose, isn't it? This is about life chances for students. So while I think it's important not to go down the rabbit hole of something that may not, provide students with the foundations and the basics they need to be able to access the world when they leave school. And I suppose I come at that from the point of view that many of our students are from deprived areas where qualifications for them are an opportunity to go to college, to go to university, possibly be the first person in their family to do so. And we want to prepare them, we want to equip them for the world that lays ahead. So I suppose we're looking for a new specification or, a new qualification that allows that rigour while also embracing new methods of reading and writing, I suppose.
Okay. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to add or.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I completely agree with that, and uh, I think that's the issue with the current language qualification, so that I could leave school with a good grade. I could leave, with a 4 or 5 that will allow me to access next steps, but I won't necessarily be equipped for the things that you just talked about. So actually, has that grade served me well in terms of being able to express myself clearly, to be able to write job applications and letters. And I'm not saying that that's all that students should do, of course, but I think at the moment it's not. It's just not. I don't think it's serving that purpose at all. I also feel one of the things that makes me slightly nervous about moving on to non-traditional text is how quickly that can become outdated. If you think how long we've had the current specifications and key stage 3 programs of study, if you imagine that in however many years time, I think that there's a danger that I just wouldn't want it to be sort of tokenistic and something that quickly becomes outdated. And which is why I also agree with Rebecca's comments. I think again we've just been looking at our own specification that actually spotting bias in stuff that they read online, being able to sort of read between the lines. I think that's the thing that we need to focus on. My worry, I don't want it to be a sort of tokenistic sort of here's something from a web page, here's something from something else, and actually not being taught anything about the ways to engage with those texts. But I guess that will be our job in our schools as well, regardless of what may sort of shake out in terms of assessments.
Thank you. Yes, sure. Yeah. And I guess this really ties into the next question. So is there anything that the car and hasn't necessarily focused on, or that you'd like to see more of in the reform discussion? I feel like, Heather, you started to touch on it there. You're talking about skills for life. So I don't know if anyone wants to step in and begin, but are there any aspects that you think need to be highlighted even more for the subject of English and that you'd like to have deeper discussions about? I'm going to pick on someone.
I'll happily
Thank you,
step
Leandri.
in. Absolutely fine. And I think a lot of this has already been mentioned. Both Rebecca and Heather has made quite a lot of comments about this already, but I think we need a curriculum that is intellectually rigorous, accessible to all learners, one that reflects the realities of their modern lives much more so than what the language curriculum currently does. And I think there are elements that need to be strengthened, like digital and media literacy, which obviously is the future that a lot of our students will be facing. I think more around embedding functional literacy and ensuring that that language curriculum is truly rooted in linguistic knowledge rather than simply replicating assessment objectives across language and literature, which is what we have at the moment. And I think English language specifically needs to have a distinct purpose where it focuses on the nature and expression of language more so than anything else. And for me, I think a genuinely student-centered curriculum, one that is designed around the needs, identities, and aspirations of our young people, something that would prepare them for the demands of further study, but also employment and life beyond school, which I think at the moment the traditional English GCSE doesn't quite manage to do that for all students. And I think we've had quite a lot of conversations at ARC about this. I think crucially, we believe in the importance of a liberated Key Stage 3 curriculum, kind of going back to that earlier comment around Key Stage 3, one where depth is prioritized over exam-driven routines, and where students in every classroom can encounter really rich, challenging, and well-sequenced learning. And I think for us at ARC, that is really the foundation that will allow them to succeed in any qualification, but also thrive as confident, capable users of language, which is ultimately what we want our students to be when they leave our English classrooms. And I think for us, an English curriculum is a curriculum for all students in every classroom, regardless of your starting points, regardless of your ability. and really kind of striving for that inclusivity and just making things really specific and clear, and kind of taking that ambiguity out of what is language actually versus obviously literature, where we have a stronger sense of what we are trying to achieve. So I think that it would be great for the conversations to really focus and hone in on that.
Thank you, Leandri. Brian, I'm going to come to you next. What would you like to see more of in the reform discussions?
Yeah, I actually just completely agree with everything you've just said. I think, I think finding a place for language that's beyond it just being a crossover for literature, I think is really important. And you'll see, it's interesting. Students will perform better in literature now than language, and I think sort of language GCSEs are starting to become a little bit sort of devalued from the students' perspectives. I think it just feels a little bit sort of dreary, and I think that links back to exactly what you've just been talking about, which is it's quite difficult to see what the purpose of it is, what's the overall aim of that, and I think that's become more clear. I think the other thing I would say is that I think I would like to see the way that diversity in the curriculum is handled, just thought about very carefully, and that there is a varied group of people who are consulted on that. So I think one of the things that we're really clear about in our curriculum is to make sure that when students see themselves in the curriculum, they're not always being othered or oppressed. So that actually the diversity in the curriculum means writers from a variety of different backgrounds not being defined by what is perceived as their otherness. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit of a trap that can be fallen into. So, students want to see themselves as the hero and being celebrated and being triumphant as well. And one of the things that we did in our trust when we first created our curriculum was we've had a diversity and inclusion review and a women in the curriculum review involving teachers from our schools who represent different groups, so that make sure that we're hearing different voices, because we're very aware of not making assumptions or decisions that aren't based on our own sort of lived experiences. So that's been really important to us. So I think that would be something that I'd really want to see happening with the new curriculum, and some real careful thought about that, actually.
I absolutely agree with that.
Go on, Becca.
And I was just going to say that it is certainly a trap in terms of creating what appears to be a diverse curriculum, but actually having themes, that just don't represent any sort of diversity at all. Actually, it's one lens that we're looking at things through, and I think that is hugely important. And I think the other thing that, I mean, maybe is not a discussion for now, but I think is worth thinking about is the drafters of the curriculum don't represent that
absolutely
diverse panel of people that you would hope would be having that discussion. And that is one big fear for me, that however diverse you might say a curriculum is, if it's only been created by a very small group of people through one particular lens, it can never truly be diverse. And I think that's something that certainly I am a little bit sort of worried about going forward. I also think in terms of what is not clear within the curriculum review is this idea of us reducing the amount of time in exams and perhaps going for more depth rather than breadth, but then taking nothing out of the list of literary texts that must be covered, but saying also we've got autonomy to be more diverse in our options and what we choose, but you still have to cover these very specific things, and nothing is being taken out to make room for anything. So I wonder whether we truly are going to have less content and more depth available to us, because they've said one thing but contradicted it on the other hand. So I'm interested to see how that plays out as well, in terms of, it was nice to see a mention of the need for less time in exams, and it was nice to see the mention of depth rather than breadth, but I don't quite see where it's planned to actually manifest itself in the actual report.
I think it shows, Becca, that we're on the same wavelength. So I literally just like teacher autonomy, and I was going to follow up just now on that point, because that is stated, and that the teacher should have an opportunity to choose texts of local significance, how the DfE responded to that point. But as you say, where is that going to fit when it is exactly the same list of texts?
And I also think that there is, again, the argument of students' experience in education is not just Key Stage 4. So if we look at it as a 5-year programme of study, then there can be lots of autonomy and great choices in terms of that. If we then try and reduce that experience, that education, into the 2 years of Key Stage 4, and then not remove anything to make room for anything else, then it's never going to happen in an authentic way. It's going to be shoehorned, or we're going to go back to the original issue of well, why would, it's difficult to choose a new text when we've got a whole plethora of experience over many years of teaching this, and we know that students do well when we teach this, and it also has academic merit. We're forcing people to swap out one thing for the other, when really, if we look at the 5-year journey, there's lots of rich opportunities to build in the diversity and the autonomy and the localization that we would love to see. Why are we reducing it to those 2 years of Key Stage 4 in the conversation when it should be a 5-year conversation? And that takes the pressure off, and that then reduces the sort of pressure to sort of shoehorn something in because we've got to be diverse, or shoehorn something in because if we're not the ones that are changing it, then we're going to be the only ones that are, that haven't moved with the times. I think it's a mistake to look at it that way. We have to look at it as a 5-year journey, or, even longer than that if we go right down into the primary years.
Can I just add something to that really quickly that I really agree with, is this idea of sort of regional diversity of text. So that's kind of built into our Key Stage 3 curriculum in terms of choice from schools, but we have maybe about 60 secondary schools, I think now. I've lost track of the last number, but they're so diverse. We've got schools in London, in Carlisle, in Manchester, in Bournemouth, lots of seaside, and actually it's really important that students see themselves represented in terms of where they're from in that part of the country as well, so that all of the literature they look at isn't just based in London, and that's seen as where these things happen, that they see their voices in other ways as well. I really agree with that.
Thank you. Heather, sorry, I don't know how you follow.
I know, I'm trying to think of something fresh.
See more.
Trying to think of something different today. With regards to, I think you're absolutely right, Rebecca, that you could have a platter of whole new texts, couldn't you? And you could say to teachers, well, you've got the autonomy. Now, these are the categories that you need to fulfill, but you can choose from any one of these texts in order to do it. But, will they actually do it? Will departments want to do that because of the quite substantial workload that's involved in it? So that'd be interesting too. But they have said they don't want to increase content, but how do we choose something different? And the other thing that when you were talking, Leandri, I was thinking very much about my own trust, because we sent 2 young men to Eton this year on scholarships to do their A-levels, which is really quite significant for them, their families, their communities. They're from an area where you may not even go to sixth form, never mind go on to do your A-levels at Eton. And I just thought how wonderful that for those students, they had a curriculum, they enjoyed a curriculum where they were able to exist on the world stage in a very, very different setting from the one where they grew up. But they were confident, they were assured, they were articulate, they were educated, and they were determined. And I think that's what we're all looking for in a curriculum that means that every child can achieve their full potential, and everybody, no matter what their starting point, can be a successful person in the world. It's just we don't quite know what it's going to look like to allow us to arrive at that point. But that's our driving ethos, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, and I think sometimes when we are so focused on assessments and results and outcomes, which is often what schools and academies find themselves in, this sort of stressful, pressured situation, we take away the the joy from the classroom, and that's where we get students who would not normally perhaps choose to read this book or choose to study this play or would never think to pick up that particular text. That's where we open those doors for them. And if we are teaching that in a joyful way, if we are giving them voices, powerful voices, through the vocabulary that we teach, through the structures that we're teaching them in terms of the way to articulate themselves, if we're really, as I said, at the beginning, if we're really confident that our curriculum offers that, exactly what you've said, Heather, is that we are going to give those students the confidence to stand amongst their peers with confidence, and exist in that global playing field. And that's our job. At the end of the day, that is our only job, to make sure that those young people leave us confident and able to be productive members of a society in the way that they choose, choose the pathways that they want to choose, and know that every pathway is open to them. There is no ceiling because of where you were born or what your life started as. You can be what you want to be, and that's ultimately what we're aiming for with our curriculum. And I totally agree with what you're saying. It's amazing that you say
very uplifting statement. That's really uplifting view. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm aware that I have not left much time for any question and answers. There were, and because I was keeping an eye on the chat and there wasn't anything coming through, but someone has just made a contribution and they've reflected on the fact that spoken communication, it has been kind of drawn out in the cars, and that's going to have greater focus. But that's balance of the grammar of writing, the proper grammar, let's say standard English grammar of writing, but then recognising, the individual identities and local and regional diversity and the value that gives. So I don't know if anyone wants to give a very brief comment on that, because it has to be brief because we've only got 1 minute left.
That's one for Brian. This is your bag, isn't it, Brian?
Yeah, I feel like I don't have anything wise to add to it. I think the important thing is what the person has put in the chat there is being aware of that and making sure that that's part of your thought process. I think that's the important thing, really. I'm aware that wasn't a very exciting answer, but that is what I believe. Yeah.
There's some great local authors as well in a lot of the regions. Like, we've got some schools in Birmingham, and there's some great local authors in Birmingham who have gone in to speak to our schools and our students in Birmingham. And just that opportunity to see, actually, from Birmingham, I can become a writer, I can become a poet.
Yeah.
Because look, this poet, this writer has come in with their publicized novels and anthology of poems. So definitely, I think tap up those regional areas and just expose the children to as much.
Great suggestion. That's a
great
suggestion.
Just one more thing.
Brian, really quickly.
Right. The other thing that we make sure that we do is we'll mention the background, geographical or otherwise, of writers, even when and especially when it's not significant to the writing that they've done, to make that same point about people coming from lots of different backgrounds and being able to write about lots of different things.
That's a really good point. Thank you so much. And I mean, I don't know if you realise that it's kind of the whole hour has now gone. So we're at the top of the hour, and it's now time for everyone else to kind of go and have their evenings. But it's been so informative. I think it's really helped to see the kind of, even though you represent a range of different trusts, you do have similar outlooks that you're expressing, and we're all trying, as Rebecca said, we're all trying to kind of get our students to be the best that they can be, and know that they can be whoever they want to be, wherever they come from. So that's, it's a really great sentiment to leave everyone with. But thank you so much again for your time. Thank you to everyone who's been listening as well. And please, if there's any contributions, do kind of keep on the chats. But otherwise, thank you so much. Have lovely evenings, everyone.